Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel, and where we discuss everything important that's related to cannabis and the cannabis industry with leading experts from across the field. Today, I'm thrilled to have Mr. Mike Siebold with me, who is here and is a true trailblazer in the cannabis workforce development and a management partner of FlowerHire. Mike, thank you so much for being a part of the show, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Absolutely. Look, let's talk a little bit about, some of the incredible opportunities and challenges that are facing the cannabis market today. So let's get started with maybe even, tell me a little bit about your background, where you're from, how long you've been in the business, and how you got started.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about my journey in cannabis is it started in academia. So I'm originally from the East Coast. And when I was actually an undergrad in college, I got involved with, I actually took 2 classes by a reputable professor and academic named Dr. and Professor Carl Hart. And I chose 2 classes that he taught: drug use and abuse and drugs and behavior. And that was my education into drug policy in America. I started learning about cannabis in abstract, almost when I was a freshman, almost 20 years ago. And my career has been in CPG and startups, biotech, nutraceuticals. I've been very lucky to look at early stage businesses and new, emerging, and sometimes, industry that's already been around for a while, legacy industry. FlowerHire is interesting. I met David, my partner, about 7 years ago in California, just as adult use was switching on. And over that length of period of time, we've placed over 1,200 management up executives, managers, senior managers, VP, all the way up to board and executive suite. Domestically, we've been in over 30 different marketplaces. We currently have a roster of the best and brightest recruiters domestically. And what I get to do specifically is oftentimes on the advisory side of our business, parachute into businesses and look at the issues that are kind of hindering growth for a lot of these businesses domestically. And the great thing about cannabis that's interesting is you ask the first question, which is about opportunity in cannabis. Cannabis is only in 24 marketplaces, and thankfully, from a recreational standpoint, we worked in all of them. We have had an interesting time actually seeing the same issues play out at different intervals, at different times in different marketplaces. So one of the things that we do, besides finding a talent pool to find the best-in-class professional for your growing business, we also carry with us best practices to make sure that the businesses function themselves. So in a sense, we're kind of HR's best friend. We constantly are finding and inundating them with best practices through the HR lane, but specifically and more often, we're helping them find and locate talent to progressively push these businesses into a new atmosphere.
Let's go back to the very beginning of what you said. You took a class. That first class was what?
Drug use and abuse. And then the second class was drugs and behavior.
And so drug use and abuse, was that a negative kind of anti-cannabis course, or was it just a course that was giving you information?
Well, what it did really was talk about all the factors that go into deciding why something should be prohibited from people, which is, prohibition is an invention. Right. And so the idea was what specifically was leading to the idea of any of these substances, any of them being prohibited, especially something like cannabis, which is never really sat well. I mean, the example that we didn't have at the time that we currently have is the fact that with the Controlled Substance Act, right? That was basically a recategorization of a lot of laws that had previously prohibited cannabis on a state-by-state basis. The Controlled Substance Act basically just diluted the idea of it being beneficial whatsoever by listing us next to heroin, LSD, things that have no medicinal benefit. So the real idea.
But did this course try to explain the fact that this has been a substance that had been around for 5,000 years, been a substance that had been an integral part of the actual makeup of America? There are those who believe, when you look back at the, late 15th century, early 16th century, you saw that cannabis was really part of the infrastructure of America. Then all of a sudden we move up, till, the latter part of the 18th century, early 19th century. Then all of a sudden, because of non-substance reasons, this becomes some sort of a vile substance that should be prohibited. Did that course talk about that, or did you kind
Yeah.
of do that up? Huh?
I mean, it was always less about the substance we were talking about and the thoughts, the feelings, and the special interest that was against it and trying to prohibit it. Like, what were the real reason is that cannabis is prohibited is not simply because people all of a sudden discovered that it was bad for you. It's always, to your point, been a part of a culture, an ecosystem. It's always been a part of the fabric of
I mean,
humanity.
you go back and look. All of our forefathers grew it, and for
Yeah.
anybody to deny that all our forefathers smoked it are liars because they all smoked it, and because we were living in a time in history where I mean, remember lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my! And people were still going out in the woods wiping their butts with leaves. So we're looking at a time where there was no air conditioning, no heat. People were sleeping on the ground. Life was tough, and also at a time when the 100% of the population in this country literally didn't drink water. They drank something that was close to called near beer. We don't teach that. I don't know why we don't teach that in history, but the fact of the matter is mankind realized very quickly that you couldn't walk over to the stream, put a cup in and drink the water. Why? Because upstream from you, about 50 yards, was a lion, tiger, bear, or a beaver pissing and what in that water. So therefore we had all kinds of disease. And so we started, actually distilling water, and even babies drank 3.1, 2.9 alcohol content water all day long. And so people were walking around smoking that hemp that was being used for the sails and ropes.
Yep.
And our forefathers were growing it. There was a period of time when you could even pay your taxes with hemp. So now all of a sudden this becomes some vilified substance only because it interfered with, I believe, those who were trying to promote textiles and destruction of, the big trees in America, William Randolph Hearst and Charles DuPont, who funded this clown Anslinger, who was then in charge of prohibition of alcohol, but then that was lifted. So now homeboy needed a job. So the same thing that he went around the country talking about how a better substitute was cannabis to alcohol. Now all of a sudden, oh Lord, I got to find something to do. I need a job. Let's blame all this on these dark people and say this is what's destroying the fabric of the world. And I mean, did that course you took discuss that in that way?
Sure. The very nature of the law is use the word marijuana specifically because of Central and South America
Correct.
and that purposing through the South.
Yep.
So, the words that we choose and the path that we chose is entirely predicated off special interest, racism, fear of other. I mean, again, you're talking about socioeconomic and political ramifications that people chose, not based off what it did for people, but who was caring and what that meant. And
Right.
I think that was the place that I came from in academia, was learning about the idea of prohibition being an invention. And every time, and the thing that I get to do now in a lot of sense is work towards taking decades of public service announcements and reversing them, and not just creating opportunity domestically and amplifying domestic opportunity about this, but destigmatizing it. People, we have seen firsthand literature that dispels the idea of not just the lazy stoner idea, not just this being beneficial, but very productive for people to use on a recurring basis if it's done correctly.
And
Yet,
the fact that in the last 5 years, I mean, every single year there's around 2,500 to 3,200 peer-reviewed published documents that are coming out around the world about cannabis
Mhm.
since 2021. So therefore, to try to sit that, I mean, it trips me out sometimes when I listen to politicians or others saying, "Well, when we do the proper amount of research, we'll be able to understand." It's like, shut the, what up. The research, there's more research already been done on cannabis than almost any other drug that's in the marketplace today.
well,
Which brings me to this question. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the thing that really drives the point home about the idea of politicians. This is a bipartisan issue, but the thing that came out recently that's really important highlighting is Curtis Hanna. He's a cannabis lobbyist in Minnesota. He went through the Nixon presidential library, through all the tapes. And in about 1971, and this is recorded and this is public, President Nixon, who is the architect of the Controlled Substance Act that we currently live with, specifically said to congressional White House aides that I don't think it's particularly dangerous. I also know that the young people want to legalize it. And then he said, on the other hand, I know it sends the wrong signal. And by that, he meant politically. This is the person who, again, created and formatted and propelled the war on drugs, and by virtue of that has created, I mean, mass incarceration, every issue that we see they're trying to rectify today through social equity and reparations. That's on the record. That's the architect of the paradigm we live in. So any politician today that's trying to talk about or speak to the idea that this is something that we don't have enough, enough involvement in or enough understanding, is categorically preaching to a base that's changing. It's like cool that they have a moral compass, but it's extremely dated, right?
And
Contemporary.
unfortunately, we got to wait for some of these clowns to die off before anything's going to change because they are so deeply entrenched. And even when you look at what's going on right now today, I mean, you
Yeah,
have so many states that you have these politicians coming out of the woodwork claiming, "Well, the sky is still falling. I haven't seen a cloud, but it's falling. We got to get rid of this cannabis." These guys they just make shit up just to make shit up to see if
sure.
they can be on the side of those other conservatives who just really want to perpetuate hate. That's
Yeah,
my perspective. And you know,
it's
um, and
it's
we
a potent thing.
what's that?
There's a lot of political capital in taking any sort of issue and creating outrage or frustration over it because you get instant buy-in, so you get a qualifier. You know exactly who's going to support you in that. However, the most important thing is in the same way that Nixon said, 53 years ago, going on 54 years ago, that this sends the wrong signal. Right now, we're entering the election. We're 2 weeks out specifically, and we have both candidates supporting cannabis in full. I mean, you talk,
They are supporting in full, but kind of not necessarily in full. I, I, I,
sure,
I,
like
I,
asterisk.
yeah, you got to put an asterisk here because as much as we believe that one side believes that there should be some reform. Remember, they said that 4 years ago that in the first 100 days of their term that this was going to make a change, and that didn't happen. And that's the same
Sure.
person who probably incarcerated more people than any other person as the attorney general when it came to cannabis laws in California. Still incarcerating people out there today.
Hmm.
And now let's slide over to the other guy. The only reason why the other guy I think is even remotely thinking about this is because Uday and Kusei, his two sons, are probably getting ready to try to figure out how they can do business here in Florida. That's probably the only reason why he's a supporter. Um, and and also just because he knew that it could stick a pin in the eye of his nemesis.
I mean, here's the thing: we don't have political clout as a space. I wish we did, but we don't. Our lobbying efforts are pretty minimal because of the restrictive and predatory way the market is. There's only so much financial durability. There's only so many things to support on a national and state level. I think what's
I'm sorry, I mean to cut you off, but let me just ask you this because I am taken aback by the fact that I agree with you 100% that there's restrictions on certain things that you can actually do and talk about, market, promote, those things. However, this industry has not done itself a favor. I can remember back when the industry was making less than, what, 2 or 3 billion a year, 4 billion a year in the legal market. There was more lobbying going on then than there is now when this industry is making, and clearly in the last 5 years has made over $25 billion every single year.
Mhm.
So there's been more effort put into buying myself a boat, yacht, and a fancy car than trying to perpetuate and build an industry that could have been and should be valued nearer to 90 to $100 billion a year because
Mhm.
we know that the black and gray market is doing 3 times what the legal market is doing.
Mhm.
So my problem has been in the last couple of years with our industry itself for a couple of reasons. One, lack of education. We have not done what we should have been doing from day one, and that's educating the consumer, educating the masses to make them even more supportive of this industry than they already are. Because, what is it now? I think we're up to I think it's 79% of the American public believes that there should be medical cannabis in every state in the country. And now there's over 75% of people in the country believe that it should be completely decriminalized and should be made legal as a legal substance. But if we had been doing what we should have been doing for the last 20 years while this industry was trying to get its fledgling little foothold, we would be at 100%, I believe, because we could have educated the masses to make them understand what they're understanding in other countries around the world. I mean, you're looking around the world, South Africa, Colombia, Isle of Man, Europe, China. Well, China's not supportive of THC cannabis yet, but they really are supportive of hemp and because they're growing millions of hectares of hemp in China and also in South Africa. So, I mean, as much as I like to extol the ignorance of our federal government and our leadership, I'm going to tell you that we should spend a little time beating the shit out of ourselves trying to figure out how we can stop fighting each other for, a slice of that block, the corner, and come together and realize that that rising tide would lift all boats if we just stop for a second and come together. I go to too many conferences where, it's like a room full of people competing against each other and talking bad about the person in the booth next to them. It's like, stop. We need to come together. Sorry.
No, no, that's the thing that's hard about something that is, for societal benefit that feels that has a huge cultural inclination as a space, but also is still an open market. That's the biggest issue about the idea of people that are being commercially minded versus communally operated. A lot of people, I wish there was consensus. And I imagine if we spoke as one voice, it would be much better than what we currently have, which are small voices kind of lost over time or that they fade. I agree with you. I would love for there to be solidarity and uniformity. And I think a lot of associations do that. The thing that's really hard is in the hindrance is some of our issues are absolutely self-inflicted. Let's not get that twisted. We absolutely have not necessarily done as much as we can to train, develop, and propel the messaging that we have from a market by market basis. But I would say the other thing too is it's a big luxury in a lot of ways to talk about, trying to be loud about the societal benefit when from a day-to-day business perspective, the amount of obstacles you have to face, not necessarily from your competitors, but just from the market, kind of hinder that from happening.
Right.
I think if we were it's almost funny. It's like cannabis is no longer legal. Now it's just illegitimate. If we had access, as traditional industries do, I think the messaging and the education would be profound. It would be much better than what it currently is. So it's hard because there's so many conflicting signals. Are you an activist or a capitalist? It can be a challenge for people to decide. And sometimes it's day to day, sometimes even, it's hour to hour.
Absolutely. No, I believe me, but my friend, I do understand that 100% because, in some ways I have tried to be a capitalist, but I was trying to be a capitalist to be, an activist as a capitalist. And, that those two things don't serve each other. It's just been incredibly tough. I mean, I think what you've been doing has been incredible in working to help us come up with kind of like a homogeneous workforce. Is that really like the way to say? Is that the right way to say it?
I wouldn't
Homogeneous.
call it homogeneous. I mean, the interesting thing is, for me, I don't see cannabis as a space that is just like reiterating what we did before. I think it as a place for experimentation. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to create an industry we haven't seen before, not just because of what the plant makes us think, but what we can do and just deciding to make new standards. I think cannabis is a great canvas. I think it's a great way to propel female leadership. I think it's a great way to find disproportionately impacted communities and train and develop them to be the next generation of leader domestically and worldwide in this thing. Cannabis is not nearly as pervasive as we think from a global perspective. Just think if we decided to train the next generation of talent, what that would do, not just for the US, but the world, if we could be the leading provider of talent. So I think at a micro scale, I talk about communities I work in that are smaller jurisdictions, sometimes states, and then sometimes the country. But I think there's a unique opportunity for us to be vivid with what we want to be versus just saying this is what came before. I think cannabis is a great way to define new characteristics for a contemporary workforce. That's
Well,
what I get.
let's start right there. Let's start talking about some of the workforce trends. I mean, where do you see growth happening in the cannabis industry? When it comes to jobs, and what do you think the future might look like?
We're going to go from 28 billion about this year, like you mentioned, to triple that in about a decade.
In the
And we
legal
know
market? In the legal market.
in the legal landscape. Yeah, thank you.
But if
And
that happens, if we go that way, triple that in the next decade, think about tripling the black and gray market in the next decade. So, I mean, right now they estimate that black and gray market to be somewhere around 70 billion to 90 billion. Triple that, now we're talking 270 billion. Or do you think that this legal market may start to figure out how to impact? Well, it's never going to happen unless we change some of these stupid draconian laws or allowing these assholes to tax it at some ridiculous rate that's just arbitrary, the same arbitrary rate that they pick how much THC should be in something.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, when we build industrial grade anything, we create standards and practice to create mass produce something. And cannabis mass produced, like not all processed weed is junk. Some of it's great. When we start building the legal landscape, there comes a point where you surpass the durability and the capability of any black market participant to compete. Right now, as we talk, it's $70 an ounce in Michigan. And not only that, not only does it get cheaper to produce and widely available, we also have derivative products that a lot of black market participating group has no reason to make a beverage or a bath bomb, right? It's not easy to move. It's not easy to perpetuate. It's also much more trouble than what it's worth. So I think the illicit marketplace will just move on to a separate semblance of product or substance. I don't necessarily think that cannabis is long for their world. I don't think they're going to triple. It's quite the opposite. I think we're going to put the heel down and really make it impossible for them to compete, because once we get canopy in place and professional expertise and knowledge and know-how, you can't compete with something that is down the street producing under 40 acres of greenhouse, moving it all the way from California to some other disparate locale.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. But now I also looked at an article that came out a couple of weeks ago talking about, a lot of the investors that have invested money in a lot of these multi-stake stakeholders, haven't seen their returns yet, and they're going to start calling some of this money in. How bad do you think that's going to impact the industry to help us continue a upwards, spiral in growth rather than destroy it?
Well, I think the important distinction is to realize that any industry is an iterative one, and in a lot of ways, I kind of couch a lot of those early stage market participants as pioneering businesses, absolutely, but like 1.0 that live in a paradigm that might abruptly change, like rescheduling. So, it's the symptoms and the problems and the financial woes that a lot of these businesses have to suffer from uh, are, again, not necessarily entirely self-inflicted. You're talking about, in essence, 75% effective tax rate for a lot of these businesses because of 280E. So I think the important distinction is to understand that the first iteration of these businesses is circumstantial to the marketplace that we were in, not the thesis we're always going to have. Cannabis is going to change. It's going to be much more pervasive. Eventually, we will get access to banking. It's not that far off. Eventually, we will have cannabis as a Schedule III substance, which will change the dynamic dramatically from a taxation standpoint. So when I see these businesses coming up and having financial durability issues, I don't instantly say to myself that an investor is always going to see that issue, because inherently the underlying laws that feed into that thesis are going to change. So I think it'll seem more like a 1.0 business cycle versus this is the truth for the duration and for the remaining time we have with this industry.
Wow. So you anticipate, you really look towards growth over the next couple of years rather than any stagnation.
It's unavoidable. There's only going to be more growth, and I've seen every sort of thing that would hinder growth. Even during COVID, we had the essential service designation. I thought cannabis businesses were going to close. In the opposite realm, we were deemed one of the more important services to be left open.
And probably, and again, during that whole phase, I mean, we sold more cannabis than we sold milk in America, which blows
We
my
saw
mind. Huh?
and not, and not just selling cannabis, but we made concessions. We started doing curbside delivery and drive-through pickup by virtue of that. I mean, you're talking about a completely different business paradigm that we entered into by virtue of what we need to do for COVID. So when I saw that we were deemed an essential service designation, I thought to myself, there's only going to be more duration and upward incline. But that doesn't mean every business and every business local to you is going to succeed. Only a quarter of all the businesses out there are profitable currently. I think with rescheduling, you're going to see that number lift to about half. Now,
That's a huge.
that has huge implications. And more importantly, we're only at 24 states for adult use. That's it. We haven't even eclipsed the halfway mark for adult use marketplace participating states in the United States. I think it's early. I think anyone that will look at this space and see the success that we have in small part is not necessarily predicated off the businesses that are going to have durability. We're going to see iterative processes. We're going to see businesses we have not unearthed yet or that haven't entered the marketplace. So I see nothing but growth. Minnesota goes live in the springtime. We've already started doing work in that marketplace, started qualifying the talent pool there to propel that state. It's a huge state on of itself. And then by that point, Ohio will have been a little under a year old with 11 million people inside of it. So, you have of course, you have other catalysts like adult use. Amendment 3 for Florida is on the ballot come November, needs to pass that 60% threshold. But that is a huge change. That is a big catalyst for the Southeast United States. I think if Florida goes, that's one of the larger bits of information and development that we could see as a marketplace. Absolutely.
Right. And what do you see as far as opportunities are for job seekers in this evolving marketplace? I mean, at every level, do you see jobs opening up?
Sure. The hardest issue is not if there's opportunities, it's proximity. Are they near to you? I get messages on LinkedIn and even Instagram sometimes, people in Wisconsin or Kentucky asking me about, opportunities in and around where they live. If there isn't a marketplace, there isn't. You'd have to move, you have to uproot yourself and find and get in proximity to those opportunities. So that's the biggest issue, which is there's limitations to how far the opportunity reaches. But in terms of back office, accounting, cultivation, manufacturing, production, all of these businesses are starting from inception as we speak, and they're rolling out in short order. In a lot of ways, these opportunities are not just there and present, but they're also reviving or resuscitating parts of America that haven't seen manufacturing jobs in decades. So there are going to be lots of jobs. It's hard to say which are going to be the most pronounced, but are there going to be more executive roles? It's unavoidable. Are there going to be more production facility, operational, retail roles? Absolutely. Cultivation? Absolutely. The degree, that's predicated, like you said, on the market development. Are there going to be a lot of regulatory hurdles that are going to make a marketplace grow not fast enough to necessitate all the need or want from the talent pool perspective?
And
But no matter what, more growth.
how do you think that this whole idea in some places around the country, and I think it's interesting, the unionization question keeps coming up of cannabis employees, especially when you're looking at some facilities that don't necessarily put the employer first. You know what I mean? The employee first. I think that this is going to be an issue that's going to circle around us, especially if, let's say, the Fed steps in and says, let's do a Schedule 3 change. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to have, and I think that's something that I do agree that's going to take care of the 280E issue, but it's going to cause a whole series of other issues that I think the industry is not even thinking about. And
Absolutely.
huh?
Absolutely. Unintended
Like
consequences.
I'll give
Absolutely.
you one example. In the state of Georgia, Georgia has a cannabis law. It's a medical cannabis law that doesn't allow for any smoking, any vaping, and also doesn't allow for edibles. However, it does allow for pills, tinctures, and other products that you put in your mouth and you swallow. But that's not an edible. Let's get that straight, because as long as it has something to do with something that might have been available in a pharmacy in the way that they distribute medication, then that should be okay. And remember, Georgia also was the first state to institutionalize in its law the ability for independent pharmacies to carry cannabis products, which is different than any other state. And as this rolls out, I think it's going to have an incredible impact on all of its surrounding states that haven't passed laws yet. So, I mean, I just gave you 20 questions in one. Sorry. So let's go back to the unionization question, then pick up some of the other. What do you think?
Well, unionization it's not a topic or an issue, but it's a byproduct of any growing space. The Teamsters, the UFCW, Seed, they've been active in cannabis for quite some time. Organized labor in America is having a big moment. You've seen specifically the UAW, Starbucks, Amazon. These are large institutions outside the scope of cannabis where organized labor has been really active. Cannabis is no different. The caveat, though, is in some instances, I think it's 8 states specifically, in order to get your license, you have to sign a labor peace agreement, which means you have to go to a table and talk about collective bargaining agreements. Unions, though, are interesting because it's a tool for solidarity, usually around employees that are losing opportunity in 3 key areas: career path, corporate communication, right? Which direction are we going in? Mission values, But lastly, usually the most pronounced is compensation. People want to learn a living wage so they can have civic pride in what they do, but most importantly, have a lifestyle that they can support. The organization of cannabis retail, production, etc., uh, is going to be a natural byproduct of the fact that these are ultimately manufacturing jobs. And a lot of these employees want to have fair compensation, want to have active conversations with management. Now, we're not anti union or pro union, we're pro incentive. We talk about businesses that can do more by listening to firsthand accounts from employees about what they need to be successful, training and development, benefits that they really want and really need in order to support their lifestyle.
Safety in the workplace.
Exactly. A safer workplace, exactly, which I don't think gets enough of a look, frankly.
Right.
Cannabis is not as safe as people give it credit for.
Correct.
But the interesting thing about unionization in cannabis is it's a double-edged sword, and more importantly, sometimes it doesn't work. There have been decertification. A lot of industry groups, recently Cresco in Illinois, I think in April, actually decertified the UFCW for representing them in collective bargaining agreements. They effectively said, we are going to go speak to the company first. We don't believe the dues that we are paying you are creating a better balance or better options for us as workers. So when you're a union, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stay a union member. It doesn't mean that the company is necessarily going to stay unionized. But I think it's important to talk about the fact that no matter what happens, whether it's unionized or not, the central conversation is making sure that career, communication, and compensation are being talked about and expanded. One of the reasons why we're having an HR leadership during MJ BizCon, it's at the ARIA. One of the primary topics is talking about workforce development, not because of unionization, but because of the fact that we always need to have that topic front of mind. If unionization enters the conversation and we're preparing for it, if we've been creating a better working environment for our people, it's more of a challenge when a union comes in that wants to ask for something that you're already providing. Because unionization oftentimes can change the complexion of a business. It can change the trust that exists between employer and employee. It can.
And I mean, when you're talking about the trust, and especially in this safety area, talk a little bit about some of the workplace hazards that are intrinsic and part of the cannabis industry and that need to be addressed.
Sure. I mean, there's been a couple instances of people inhaling, trichomes, the kief, things that kind of are that already exist on the plant and have allergic reactions to it. And one of whom actually passed away, I think, in Massachusetts.
Yes.
Well, ultimately, you're talking about safety protocols that are OSHA compliant. The thing that's always interesting to look at cannabis is it's so reminiscent of other industry. At the same time, it lectures some of the structural frameworks that are just important. They're key. They're unsexy and obligatory. Safety is one of those unsexy obligatory facets that sometimes these early stage manufacturing businesses ultimately fall short on. They don't have good protocols. They don't have good safety protocols. They don't actually make sure that the environment is not a compromised one. But the sorts of issues that you can have can be from being near these organisms in a fake environment and having some kind of reaction biologically to, frankly, manufacturing jobs where things fall on you. There is an instance of injury or being maimed or being hurt somehow, moving industrial scale size, inventory. So I think that's the point, which is cannabis, for all the things that it's reminiscent of, is still early stage. We still have to we have to define and create protocols that usually we take for granted outside scope industry and make sure that we're perpetuating them. Sometimes these companies don't perpetuate them the way that they should.
Gotcha. And there are, so that's some very important points that you just bring up there, but there's some unique benefits to cannabis industry jobs and that they offer also. I mean, I'm not sure if I know enough to be able to say this, but in some of these instances, do they provide health care to employees or do you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's table stakes. Yeah, I think the important thing is probably dispel or maybe kind of bring light to the fact that, these job opportunities in cannabis several years ago didn't necessarily have all of the things that would feature in a typical legacy industry. Now do. You're talking about healthcare benefits, insights into dental, parental leave, executive severance. Several years ago, sometimes that would be absent. We're at a point now where it's mature, where those things are table stakes. It's commonplace and it's typical. What's interesting, though, is a lot of how would I put this? For a lot of the jobs that are offered, there is a tremendous amount of career mobility. I think the thing that is a highlight worth noting is you can go from being a bud tender or a assistant general manager or general manager for a single retail store in, an operator in the Midwest, and in over a short period of time become head of retail, a VP, EVP, even a regional head. The thing that is always problematic, though, is because the growth arc is so strong and your career mobility is so strong, the obligations change with it. The managerial expertise that you need to typically learn on the job through osmosis or organically, it can be challenging. So you have career mobility, but with that, you have the weight and the responsibility and sometimes the burnout of taking control of something that you're unaccustomed to in terms of size and scope. So you can have a lot of career mobility, but the caveat is always the responsibility, the managerial responsibility over the people that you have in the production sites and, operating with a P&L. You can take on a lot of responsibility in short order, and that can be a big challenge for people. That's why the learning and development piece and succession planning, creating a pipeline of leadership management is really important at these businesses. That sometimes is absent, oftentimes actually.
Right, right. And I mean, if you had to put on your crystal ball, you've been working in this industry now long enough to kind of get an idea of trends, but put on that crystal ball. Do you think that either one of these candidates is going to do what they claim they're going to do? And that's try to change the schedule and try to change the rules and try to implement banking?
That's the question. I mean, if I had to really shoot my shot, I would say something as I would kind of defer to what's already happened and see what takes place from that. So we know the DEA got the recommendation from Health and Human Services, HHS, to reschedule
And
cannabis.
FDA then validated the fact that there's enough research to validate it as a medicine. You're right. Go ahead.
So we saw this progressive instance where you're getting to a tipping point where it's almost hard to stop. It can be delayed, but it can't be stopped.
Right.
Now,
They just delayed it. You remember over the
yeah,
summer, they offered a 90-day, input period. And then they went ahead and said, no, we're not going to do anything until after the election. I was like, well, where did that ever
right.
come into to play? But yes, gotcha.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't take a lot of imagination to wonder why they were delayed until after validating the next president.
Right.
But I would say this: the thing that I don't know is, with the Supreme Court ruling on Chevron, which basically moves from agency oversight back to the courts, the interpretation of laws. What I have a hard time understanding, and I've talked to every wonk and lawyer that I know in the marketplace, I'm always asking them, does the DEA actually have control over what happens with the rescheduling process if the merit of what they do is changed? Because the Supreme Court ruling with Chevron says they're no longer, the thought process on laws is not necessarily agency dependent, but court related. I don't necessarily know, but I imagine, and I'm going to shoot my shot, probably by the springtime of 25, I believe, because the commentary period was so strong and the bipartisan support is so strong, and more importantly, the development of marketplace, I truly do believe that cannabis rescheduling will happen. I do, by the spring.
But what scares me, and I'll tell you, I've had some conversations with some people who have been in this legislative process all along. They're afraid also because when we reschedule from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, most people don't remember. This is a tricky dicky thing that the federal government did back in 2002. Gave themselves their own patent on all the minor cannabinoids. And they even patented cannabis in a sense that it'll be a 5-year, just, I don't know, argument process to figure out whether or not they actually control THC also, but they do control CBD and the other minor cannabinoids. Having said that, that means that if I give control over this substance, make it Schedule 3, that means it falls under the FDA. If it falls under the FDA for administrative purposes, the FDA has to be the administrator of this. So therefore, I could step into every dispensary around the country and say, if you got anything on your shelves that says CBD or has CBD in it, get off it. Get it out of there because we own it. The federal government owns it. And they could literally play any game they want to play administratively in allowing this to continue. You understand what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and I mean, every state that says, well, we're going to give it back to the states. No, you don't give it back to the states. You give it back to who owns the patent. And if we remember, that patent has been extended at least 3 times.
I mean, it's hard for me to say if I also don't want to give the FDA like the superseding power that they're going to have the ability or the budget or the personnel to go into every dispensary and enforce.
No, I agree with you there.
The FDA has they want to make sure that people don't get botulism from having cans of soup.
You,
Like they have,
you'd
frozen.
end up having an army bigger than our armed forces to be able to.
And I mean, also, you're talking about specific jurisdictions and locales. You're talking about a lot of political pressure that would come back from this space because of the fact that these communities vote. They do vote.
Right.
I think it would be. I cannot imagine the FDA in the same way that we were always wondering where the DEA is and cracking down the fact that we are really federally prohibited. Yet the DEA is nowhere on the scene for the most part. I think we're giving the FDA too much credit with the idea that they could put enforcement in place. I mean,
And,
it would take.
but then if let's say that, okay, we go to Schedule 3, and then the Schedule 3, will that federal law trump state law in the
Mhm.
sense that Fed law would then say that, excuse me, every pharmacy in the country has the right then to now carry this product, therefore shutting down the state. I don't know, it's a state pipeline through dispensaries that they set up, because the dispensaries, oh, go ahead, have a dispensary all you want, but we don't give a shit. We're going to let every mom and pop pharmacy carry cannabis if they want, and you can go to hell. And
Well, I mean, think about it this way. I mean, what you're really saying is, I'm going to supersede all the infrastructure we've built over the last, period of time, all the jobs, all the people that are actively working in the space, and basically equalize it and say that it no longer exists or should persist.
they could do that with a single stroke of the pen by saying, okay, we're going to make it Schedule 3, thereby allowing any pharmacy, even interstate pharmacies, to carry the product if they choose to. And we don't give a damn what you say. So all of you dispensaries, go ahead and keep doing what you're doing. All you state laws, keep doing what you're doing. I'm just going to step in right now and say that this brand new Schedule 3 drug has to be sold through pharmacies. Now, all of a sudden, we got a battle on the streets of America. You know what I mean? I go to Boston, I go to Massachusetts, and there are, I don't know, 1,000 dispensaries up there, but there's also probably 3,500 independent pharmacies. Now, if all of a sudden tomorrow you say to independent pharmacies, I don't give a damn what your local municipality says, you have the right to carry cannabis. What you going to do about it? Now, all of a sudden, there's not even enough people to enforce that.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing when it comes to like cannabinoids generally with like the hemp derived space is cannabis use is pervasive no matter what. So
Right.
they can put any kind of moniker on it that they want, but this product in so many iterations is already everywhere. I I have a hard time believing because the enforcement. I mean, also you'd be effectively criminalizing everything you've built up to this point. So you'd have to have incarceration at every rung, every level. You'd have to basically tell public and private industry that they no longer exist. I think the more likely outcome is with Schedule 3, you have, in essence, like not the birth of the pharmaceutical industry that's cannabinoid centric. We already have cannabinoid based medicines that are geriatric and pediatric.
Right.
I think what you start seeing is more R&D for products that are specifically geared towards specific maladies being sold through those mediums. I don't necessarily think that the recreational realm and the adult use realm is going to dissipate at the stroke of a pen. You would have the political ramifications would be hard. Imagine being the sitting president and trying to enforce that and trying to find political capital in that.
But
It
the
would
only,
it would merge.
you wouldn't even have to make any aspect of what exists right now today illegal. All you'd have to do is step in and say, this is legal. Here's a Schedule 3 now drug. Any pharmacy in America has the right to carry it. Once you do that, right there, I take the farmer who's been making my pre rolls and put it on a shelf in AB pharmacy. That AB pharmacy might be next door to Green Light dispensary. Now I'm an
It's
old,
true.
huh?
I, I just have a hard time believing with consumers that go to CVS and then now a participating pharmacy or chain is going to start carrying eighths or pre rolls or shadow or butter. That's going to be the place that you check out. I have a hard time imagining that people are going to be buying weed only that way. But at the same time, it's hard to say. I think that's the hardest thing about this interesting issue, which is there's all this change, and to your point, there's unintended consequence. I think the more interesting thing to think about is with rescheduling, pro and con, is that ultimately progress? Well, it really depends on if they're going to be able to enforce something in full. The FDA is going to be able to basically tell every participating voice, myself included, that what we've done is illegitimate, now illegal, and needs to be channeled directly through this way. The fight that would exist in that moment would be pretty fierce. And I don't believe that we would give up that fight easily. I also don't think that it would make a lot of sense from a jurisdictional standpoint. It'd be really hard to impose that. But who knows? It's hard to say. I'm not worried about the pharmaceutical industry taking what we've built. Quite the opposite. They're going to do something separate that we are not able to do. But do I think the perpetuation of the adult use marketplace is going to persist? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, see, I agree with you there. I agree. The adult use thing is the one that's really got the monkey wrench from my perspective.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
medical states that really are going to get thrown into this quagmire because, hell, I mean, okay, if I change the 280E rules, but I allow for another 1,000 stores to carry a product and I get to tax that, even if I ain't taxing it at 25%, I'm still getting me some more revenue. I just
Mhm.
think in terms of greed of politicians, greed of the establishment. They want to figure out how their beak gets wet. And
Absolutely.
that beak will be wet twofold, tenfold, if in fact they say, now that it's Schedule 3, any pharmacy who wants to carry it, go ahead and carry it. It's fine with me. Then
Yeah. I mean,
that
two,
puts me out of business if I'm next door in a dispensary. For not
I mean,
completely, I'm good.
well, I agree with you. It's like two things can be true. Pharmaceutical can enter this space, and we can still perpetuate the one that we have.
Got it. Okay.
I mean, you mentioned a really good point, which is probably worth highlighting, which is to effectively change and have FDA oversight and channel everything that we've created through the pharmaceutical paradigm. You're throttling the state's ability to have taxation revenue.
Right.
And the hardest part about cannabis is knowing that we pay so much in taxes and wondering if it's being spent appropriately. But ultimately, you're talking about states being subsidized by our industry. And they are, these programs help expungement. They help veterans. They pay for Meals on Wheels. They fill potholes. That's the other thing too, which is you're talking about potentially cutting that off. And to your point, politicians and special interests of any sort and shape and size are going to be like, you're not going to take that from me after I've been developing it. So again, I think you get a number of different pressures exerted that won't prohibit the FDA oversight piece in full.
I've also been. I'm just wondering, and when it comes from everybody's trying to upgrade the technology, and I've been in a couple of facilities where the automation is incredible,
Mhm.
cutting into the number of jobs, and it's only a matter of give me legal right to now truly automate and put some money into this. How do you think that's going to impact the future of the cannabis workforce and workforce development?
Sure. I mean, you're going to see automation and cultivation because that's what happens to cultivation. And then also in America, you can't organize, for the most part, you can't organize any agricultural worker, with the exception of a few states. So it makes sense to basically create, a business initiative and then a format where you have less people involved from a cost savings perspective and for production capability. But the asterisk is the fact that automation is extremely expensive and cannabis is capital starved.
Right.
It's not as easy as saying that we're going to have automated HVAC systems and updated capability from a cultivation tech perspective and having these systems du jour to solve for these issues in real time. Keep in mind, cannabis itself is not very data centric to begin with. For the most part, it's still heavy handed, blue collar manufacturing work, production in agriculture. Do I think that's going to change over time? Absolutely, but not for the foreseeable future. The capital intensity is too much, and there's no global consensus on how to grow weed, let alone how to grow it. So, the facility that you saw is more of an outlier. It's not typical for a lot of these facilities to be automated because of knowledge, know-how, or capital capability.
Got it. Got it. Well, I mean, this is going to be a very interesting couple of years. Put on that crystal ball, my friend. Tell me what you think. Come on now. What do you think's going to happen? Give me your 5 year, give me your 2 year plan, 5 year plan.
2-year plan. Cannabis gets rescheduled. That changes the paradigm from a taxation perspective. these businesses instantly, for the most part, overnight become more profitable. More profitable businesses come together, they start to consolidate, and you start seeing the next iteration of single state operators getting bigger and then multi state operators. But they're not public yet, they're typically private. In the short order after that, though, they're going to go public. They're going to want to get public sentiment. They're going to want to create a new marketplace. They're going to revive the sentiment in the cannabis thesis. So the next 2.0 cannabis operator is going to come out of parts unknown. You're going to see a whole new raft of participating company that maybe lived a little bit in the 280E realm, but no longer. They're going to be profitable. They're going to be they're going to pursue buying up these pre-existing businesses that are malformed or they're not operating or they're malfunctioning, right? So you're going to start seeing consolidation. By virtue of consolidation, I think over time you start getting closer to safer banking. With safer banking, we start talking about creditworthiness. We're talking about getting access to capital that is not venture capital or predatory, but garden variety, maybe even small business association loans. Who knows? But a paradigm where we start getting access to services from the banking realm. 5 years on, what you start getting is the first instance of interstate commerce or international commercial operations and export and import.
Yeah.
I believe we start moving cultivation elsewhere.
You don't think we're going to see that intersection of international? Yeah, because we probably won't allow importation anytime soon. Or do you think we might?
You might. I mean, we're always talking about tariffs is like, front and center in this election cycle. So however it goes in November, you got 4 years of somebody carrying that burden somehow. So we don't know how it's going to manifest. I doubt it includes cannabis. But 5 years on, if there's as much consolidation and growth as I think there's going to be and opportunity that's going to persist, I genuinely believe that we're going to start looking at creating, maybe in Central or South America, a new way to perpetuate the plant. Because right now, as it stands, it's extremely expensive. It's not eco-friendly. And most importantly, its cost and energy consumption is really high. Most of the things that we grow are grown elsewhere. I think cannabis would be no different. Will that be 5 years? Probably not, but it's on the horizon. But in the near term,
Especially when you got countries like Colombia, South Africa,
yeah,
China, Isle of Man. South Africa's got close to 1 million hectares of property growing cannabis, and they've been growing it at particular altitudes. In Colombia,
yeah,
they're expanding out right now, million plus acres of cannabis being grown, and they're looking for exportation. So I just think to myself, they're knocking at the door right now, and it's only a matter of let them in. You know what I mean?
yeah. It's not. That's the interesting thing, which is, you asked me originally if I think there's going to be growth. There's going to be growth in important and consequential ways, no matter what. I think the thing that's always challenging is what are the unintended consequences that we've created, the misinterpretation of what we built for a new environment that we weren't expecting. No matter what, though, and what I get to do day in day out, and kind of creating best practices and qualifying a talent pool to perpetuate the space, is no matter what, you have more participating people. You have more participating people in communities that are able to find jobs and opportunities. You're able to find ways in which people can find not a disrespect by use, but more importantly, a part of an everyday existence. Cannabis is interesting because it's part of everyday life in America as is. That's only going to grow further. And I think what you're going to see a lot more of is less of the idea of being apprehensive about existing everywhere. I think it's going to become a fact of life. It's probably going to become boring. Buying cannabis in 20 years time will probably seem pretty blasé. Right now, it's kind of exciting because
You
it's
like
early
buying vitamin
innings.
C? Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but no matter what, there's cultural acceptance in America, right? It's been a while since we created this paradigm where it's not, but it's accepted. Now it's like, well, how far can we take that and how many people can we impact in a positive way? That's the real question that remains. There's more plus than minus, but we can't be children about this. There's going to be a lot of cons, 100%.
Absolutely. Well, my friend, I got to tell you something. I could talk to you for hours. I'm telling you, really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm sure that my viewers and listeners have enjoyed the conversation also. So, Mike, I mean, at some point in time down the road, man, if you want to come back, love to chop it up a little bit more.
Oh, I'd love to. And if I do a shameless plug for this event that we're
Oh,
throwing in
wait,
Las
come on
Vegas?
now. I want you to do a shameless plug on everything. Give me your stats, man. How can I get a hold of you first? And then,
Thank you,
yeah,
Montel.
yes.
So you can contact us at flowerhire.com. We have the best and brightest recruiters. We have some of the best opportunities in America as it pertains to any sort of job, shape, and size, pretty much in every marketplace, which is great. For an HR professional listening to this program, we are having a HR Leadership Summit December 4th at the ARIA. Only 100 HR professionals domestically sharing best practices, people that have been in marketplace for a long time. If you're new or an old operator, we'd love to get together and have a mentorship experience with you. But thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. And again, if people wanted to get a hold of you, where's dot what? Where do they go?
Mike at flowerhire.com, or you can email us any person that you find on LinkedIn with a first name. It's at flowerhire.com. We're small but mighty.
Okay, my friend. Well, be small and mighty and come back, please. I'd love to continue the conversation with you. I probably only got through about 9 of my questions and I had a whole bunch more. So I'd love to be able to talk to you some more, okay?
Love a part two. Anytime.
Okay, my friend. You stay well. Love that family of yours. Take care of yourself. We'll see you soon and make sure you keep tuning in to Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.